Welcome to Fair Housing Friday, a series we started a couple years ago as part of Fair Housing Month in April. My name is Kalia Livingston, and I am CVOEO's Fair Housing Project Education and Outreach Coordinator. Joining me today is Jess Hyman, the Associate Director of our statewide housing advocacy programs here at CVOEO. And please welcome our special guest, Nate Lantieri, Research Coordinator for the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. Nate will be here discussing his role with the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, and we will explore some important data from the most recent housing needs assessment and what those statistics indicate about our housing needs in Vermont. Thank you so much for joining us today. I ask that you keep your microphones muted as the interviews are taking place, and we will have time for questions during the last 15 minutes of the webinar. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our fairhousingmonthvt.org website. And I'll also send you the link to the recorded webinar in a follow-up email. We'll do our best to make this dialogue accessible to all, and our audience can feel free to ask any questions in the chat, who will be moderated by Jess Hyman. If you would like to have Jess ask a question on your behalf, you can message her separately in the chat and she can ask a question for you as well. Before we hear from Nate, I would like to share some information about the Fair Housing Act and the work that we do at the Fair Housing Project. The Fair Housing Act was enacted in 1968, and it was a part of the second Civil Rights Act that was passed in 1964. The original Civil Rights Act that was passed about 100 years before was closer to when slavery was legally abolished. However, there wasn't the social or political climate to actually enforce that Civil Rights Act. So we saw housing discrimination and other forms of discrimination take place for about a century afterwards until the Fair Housing Act was enacted. The Fair Housing Act protects people based off membership of protected classes. There are 7 federal protected classes, which include race, skin color, disability, national origin, sex and sexual harassment, religion, and familial status. And states can also elect additional protected classes. So in Vermont, there's also protections for people from discrimination based on their marital status, age, people in receipt of public assistance, sexual orientation, gender identity, and those with a status of being a survivor of abuse, sexual assault, or stalking. Some of the work that we do with the Fair Housing Project includes teaching fair housing related workshops and trainings to any interested parties, including housing providers, tenants, homeowners, legislators, officials in municipal offices, really whoever is interested. And we help people get more awareness about what illegal housing discrimination can look like, help them with resources if they've experienced illegal housing discrimination. And we also make suggestions for best practices to avoid breaking fair housing laws. We also conduct one-on-one fair housing consultations, and April is Fair Housing Month. So we're putting on lots of fair housing related events all month long. If you have any events that you would like us to add to our calendar, Jess is putting information in the chat. You can reach out to us directly and we can add that to our event calendar. And before we get started, I just want to take a moment to thank all of our sponsors and partners who have helped us make this Fair Housing Month happen. Just give me a moment and I will share my screen. So here you can see all of the partners and sponsors that we have for this month. Oh, nope, not yet. There we go. Now you can see all of the logos for the partners and sponsors that we have this month. And we are so thankful for their support and dedication to our housing justice work. Please feel free to take a screenshot if you'd like. You can check out their websites and social media pages and see what work they have going on. All right, now it's time to hear from our guest, Nate. Nate, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Kalia, and thanks for having me as part of Fair Housing Month. Really excited to be here and talk about some things that I care about, um, which is generally housing. So that we're going to get into like kind of how I came into this a little bit later. But first, I'll just describe my role at VHFA and really what VHFA is. Um, so VHFA stands for Vermont Housing Finance Agency, and it is a nonprofit that really, as the name suggests, is really dedicated towards financing and promoting affordable housing in Vermont. And since it was created, actually. Today is its 51st birthday, the agency's 51st birthday. We were doing a lot of 50th anniversary stuff in the last year, but that officially ends today. But for the past 50 years, the agency has really promoted affordable housing in Vermont in kind of two main ways, and then a third way, which is really where my work comes in. But can kind of think of it through the financing of affordable multifamily rentals in the state, and also through helping primarily first-time home buyers, but homeowners of different stripes um, purchase homes at affordable rates. So since 75, they've helped about 31,000 home buyers purchase a home at an affordable rate, and have helped with the development of close to 10,000 affordable rental units throughout the state. Um, so that's kind of the main bread and butter of BHFA. One of the key activities is through administering the low income housing tax credit, as well as state tax credits. Um, Low income housing tax credit is it's a somewhat complex but really important tool that exists in the U.S. For the development of affordable housing. Um, we can kind of get into the specifics of how it works later, but for the most part, really, um, what is important is that it's administered at the state level by a local housing finance agency. Every state has a housing finance agency that administers several federal programs, but primarily this low-income housing tax credit. And Since that program was created in the 80s, it's actually become the most widely used affordable housing program for the development of the actual units of affordable housing. Um, so VHFA administers that for Vermont, and that's kind of one of its key activities. And that goes into that multifamily development kind of stuff. Um, and then our third kind of piece where my work comes in as a research coordinator is through promoting this broader affordable housing landscape in Vermont. And through It's something that the agency's been doing at least for 20 years, but something that has been doing throughout it is just doing public research in support of providing high quality information about what the actual conditions are in the housing landscape in Vermont. One of the ways that we do that is through managing housingdata.org. That is It's a Vermont specific website that is really just focused on different information that we have available about really any of the conditions that impact housing markets. So costs of housing, rate of construction, income in areas, household sizes, number of households, household makeup. Um, we can kind of go into that a little bit later on. But through managing that and making that public, and then so that's something that's always publicly available. And then that informs our work with the recent housing needs assessment that was published with the state in either August or September of 2024, but really for 2025 to 2029, this kind of next 5 year period, looking at some of those projected housing needs. Um, so uh, Through that, just promoting the broader affordable housing landscape, we have our research and community relations team. And Myself and my coworker Leslie, we were the uh, two lead authors. That's what I was going to say, architects. Like buildings on the brain, but I guess we did build the report. But we're the main authors of the report when that was published. So yeah, that's kind of my like broader background of VHFA and my work there. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, and happy birthday to VHFA.
51.
Um, so what ignited your interest in this position and led you to doing this work?
Yeah. Um, so about 10 years ago, um, I I wish I could remember actually what the specific context was where I heard this phrase for the first time. But um, I was in a presentation with a local non-housing nonprofit when I was still kind of just learning broadly about like, how, want someone that wanted to become involved in my community but didn't really know some of the specific aspects. I was at a presentation with a local nonprofit housing provider, and they introduced this concept of housing first, and the idea being that we have these many potential challenges in life, and those can really be compounding when in positions of housing instability, housing insecurity. It makes it so much harder to maintain a job, maintain um, the ability to receive mail, receive checks, the ability to get to doctor's appointments on time, all these things that like, when we are housing secure, we really take for granted just like how much that home can be a building block for just stability. Um, and once I had that kind of framework, it unlocked a lot for me and understanding like, yeah, this thing that and made me reflect on my own periods of like thankfully relatively minor housing instability, but still instances where this bedrock piece of life was not as stable and many things were much more challenging. Um, so once I really had that piece, I was like, yeah, this is fundamental. This is something that I want to try to help people access, help people get to this. If we can at least get here, then maybe we can get somewhere else. So it's an optimistic standpoint, but I'm grateful that I found that key and I've been working on it really since then. So that was about 10 years ago, 20 no 9 years, 2016. But my first professional experience with housing work was actually at CVOEO, where in 2020 I was originally hired. It was my first job out of college at UVM, where I was hired to work on the housing advocacy team in a temporary role administering a voucher program. And that kind of has evolved and there's a longer tail of it. There was a lot of temporary funding at that time. But yeah, from there, then it was like, okay, this is what it's like to actually not just like think about these concepts, but this is direct service. This is like the kind of stuff that is, um, we were literally helping people exit homelessness into more permanent housing. And just that experience working so closely to the reality of people, and the reality not just of the people, but of the whole administrative process that is the affordable housing landscape, affordable housing landscape, um, really kind of like put a lot more into perspective there. Um, Eventually, that was a temporary position, so I was able to move over to another job at CVOEO that I really appreciated, which was working as a community organizer with the mobile home program. Um, Gained a lot out of that experience. Really was another great example of just like this is the real world of the importance of housing. Where so just to make another CVOEO programs work to describe it in a short way. That program is the main advocacy program for mobile home park residents throughout the state, where they have this kind of unique, specific um, legal framework through which they're housing. It's not exactly a rental situation. They're homeowners, but they often rent their land underneath. So there's specific dynamics. And this program is a really important resource for people to understand what their legal rights are in that situation. Um, but through that, we also got the experience to go and work in communities and talk to people and understand like what their needs were and what challenges they experienced, not just those things, but also the things that were working, the communities that were thriving, the the instances where neighbors were able to get to come together and cooperatively purchase a park and it was succeeding. These great examples of like, yeah, while there are challenges, it's not always that too. But whatever it all is, it's all people on the end of it, and they can be susceptible to even just minor changes. So if we're able to at least move in the slightly right direction in terms of housing, whatever that actually is, we will be better as a society ultimately, kind of again to be up at that big picture. But um, you can see it in the many small instances, these conversations you have with people. You can see it at the big picture, at in terms of kind of data and understanding like these are the macro trends where, how does this individual experience that people are having, maybe of challenges in the housing market, is that something that is particular that to that person, or is it maybe part of a trend that like many Vermonters are experiencing right now? Um, so that was just out of my own curiosity, kind of I fell into the data work, and that was ultimately I transitioned to um, my role as a research coordinator over at VHFA, which I've been here since 2023. And yeah, that's what's really great here is that it's another just slightly different perspective on like how to support this whole stream of support that exists in this, again, a quote unquote affordable housing landscape. Um, it's a different place to be able to make an impact, and it's been really great to use some of the skills that I've just picked up along the way and some of the experiences I've picked up along the way to um, provide information and really like grounded, hey, beyond just your personal experience, here's some evidence to back that up that like, yeah, these are some challenges that we all have. So um, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I really um, appreciated and enjoyed listening to how you use kind of these macro level concepts and education to apply that to the direct service work that you were doing. And I'm very grateful that you named the housing first idea and how that having stable housing can really be a building block to be able to establish other human needs, and how we often do take advantage of things that stable housing can provide to us, and forget to see how important those things are.
Yeah, I think about like, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, just that idea of like if you have your very basic needs taken care of, there's so much more room for self-expression and beyond that, also just getting by too. Um,
Absolutely. Thank you. And you got into a little bit, but can you describe in detail what this statewide housing needs assessment is, and a little bit about the process of conducting the assessment, and what data is included and where it comes from, things like that?
yeah, yeah, totally. So the statewide housing needs assessment, I guess it's also it's a document and also it's a process because it's something that happens every 5 years. It's a federally mandated requirement that the state Department of Housing and Needs Department of DHCD, Department of Housing and Community Development, geez, the that they complete housing needs assessment that meets certain criteria. They lay out exactly kind of what the bullet points that they must the what the state must meet. And then from there, we worked with DHCD to actually write the document. So, like I said, it's something that happens every 5 years. And in August or September, I think it's August, we submitted the 2025 to 2029 housing needs assessment. And I will share a slide that just has a breakdown of what the chapters were in that. I will say I was wrong. It was actually June that we submitted this. All right. Is my screen up?
Yes.
Cool. Um, it's basically what I just said, but here are the chapters also. So it starts really just kind of thematically. Here's what some of the top line takeaways are, and then it breaks it out by category and to try to kind of get into some of the different needs and conditions, some of the more specific sectors of that broader housing landscape. And really when talking about that housing landscape too, it's also just like it's everybody, you know, it's everybody that lives in the state, everybody that is living in one of these households. Um, and here are really kind of what the major top line takeaways are that um, there is a housing shortage. You know, just the actual number of homes does not meet what the demand to live in Vermont is. And that has really uh, deepened since 2020, which is our last housing needs assessment was submitted. It was titled the 2020 Housing Needs Assessment, but it was completed in February of 2020, so right before really all of the conditions of the pandemic. So um, it's kind of interesting to look back and think about like, oh, you know, some of these, if trends continue, there will be relatively modest changes. But from what we found, it seems like there were some conditional differences that happened in 2021 and 2022 that really just put additional strain on um, Vermont and Vermonters, particularly with low income renters and just low income households in general hit the hardest as you know, now we've seen just costs of many things, but particularly the acute increase in housing costs at that time. At the same time, there's also beyond people that are having difficulty finding homes, there's also this number of homes that are potentially at risk of um, decline, and you know, should can worst case scenario happen, potential loss from the housing stock. Um, Vermont is one of the oldest housing stocks in the country, so that's something that is potentially really at risk here. And then the last piece being that over time, we also anticipate that the need for um, service enriched housing is likely rising. That's kind of based on demographics, the increasing population of older Vermonters, and just different housing needs that exist. For people at different stages in life. And there's somewhat of a little bit of a mismatch in between um, household size and home size too, which if people were able to potentially be more properly sorted into households that or into homes that meet their household needs, you know, potentially there could be some problems solved through that as well. But regardless, that's new housing that needs to be built to reach that goal. So that that kind of goes into what some of the we won't go here. Whoop, I'm gonna stop sharing. Um, that kind of goes into where it comes from and what that process is, and then some of the data that was used. That is where I was talking about housingdata.org earlier. That's a site that VHFA and myself manage that we ultimately why we have been able to work with DHCD for this housing needs assessment this year and in previous years is because of the data that we maintain on housingdata.org. So that's just a free publicly available resource that has many data sources available. Primarily, the breakdown is that it's approximately 50% from the Census Bureau, and there are two products called, of course, the decennial census, where it's available, and then for data that's in intermediary years, the American Community Survey, which is a really great resource because it's able to capture some of the conditions that are going on, and like I said, in between those 10-year periods. In order to do that, though, there's some trade-offs in terms of they're inherently estimates, so they do their best job of capturing what's on the ground, but there is a margin of error included, and some of those margin of errors become more challenging as you get down to smaller geographies. You know, a town that has 200 homes, if the margin of error is 75 homes, that can really end up being a pretty big impact on clarity. So Thankfully, though, when we're getting up to the higher geographies, the county and of course the state too, they're pretty reliable estimates that we can um, really at least say that this is what's going on. Maybe this isn't the exact number of homes, the exact number of people, the exact median income. Um, it's close enough to be helpful in really capturing over time what's going on. Um, so the American Community Survey and the census, the decennial census are about 50% of the site. And then we use a few other federal resources, some from HUD, Housing and Urban Development. Um, but really the main other source is from a few Vermont level resources, such as we use the property transfer tax from the Department of Taxes. Um, we use our own data about describing where uh, affordable rental housing is, where buildings that have been funded with some sort of public subsidy. We maintain that on housing data through what's called the directory of affordable rental housing. Um, and that that's for the most part where the data comes from. There's a few other resources that the short-term rentals, that's kind of its own one-off thing. It's slightly different. We don't really need to talk about that too much, but um, yeah, those are the main resources. And then there's a few other ones for I guess one of the key differences in between the way that data is displayed on housing data and the way that it is in the housing needs assessment is that so there are a few additional priorities that the state asked for, when they were asking us to write this needs assessment. Some more specific topic areas that on housing data where we're really trying to provide comprehensive data, things that are available at every county, town over time, things that we can show change. Some of the things that we want to know or want to understand about housing aren't necessarily able to be captured by data, numbers, spreadsheets that are available in that format. So there are a few areas that we had, more uh, ad hoc kind of analysis. So things about accessory dwelling units or things about um, uh, like special. We have a chapter that's called special needs housing. So the different kinds of special considerations for housing needs. So captured in that is uh, people with the housing needs of people with disabilities, the housing needs of people with um, I'm struggling to remember what the actual kind of breakdown is just off the cuff, but I know that also farm worker housing is captured in that area. So just a few of the, kind of more special considerations that may have slightly different housing needs. Um, those were slightly more ad hoc, so those are included in the needs assessment as well.
Got it. Thank you. Just out of curiosity, as we are seeing a growing population of unhoused people, does that create a discrepancy in the data, or do you have other sources of data that can help with those numbers?
Yeah, yeah. So the two sources that we really use to describe, um, the conditions of homelessness in Vermont were the point in time count, which is a locally collected but federally mandated um, tool where one night in January, the uh, continuum of care, the local housing alliance, housing and homelessness alliances throughout the state, um, literally go out and try to get a physical count of everybody who's experiencing homelessness. And kind of like what I was saying about the ACS, where there's estimates that are included. The point in time count has its flaws. It's challenging to actually reach every person that's in the situation. But at the same time, it's one of the only data sources that we have that has similar methods conducted year over year. So that's something where um, even with the challenges that are present in the point in time count, um, the data made it really pretty obvious that regardless of whatever there might be, there was a significant increase that the state has experienced since um, really first obviously apparent in 2021, and it's been persistent throughout. And that is also pretty heavily mirrored by another data source that we use, which were just the number of unique individuals that had entered the coordinated entry process in the state. And so, not to go too deeply into coordinated entry, but basically the kind of homelessness management system that people who are looking to receive services, they enter this process and then they're able to kind of get into the queue to receive specific services. Um, that also showed that, really beyond just these one, point in January, a continued sustained number of unique individuals per week that were receiving homelessness services in the state. So, that kind of confirmed that it's like whatever the maybe logistical challenges of just this point in time, one point are, we can really say that there has been a sustained increase. And people that are in this situation, they are maybe not captured in household numbers from like the census because they are not in a household at the time. So it all of these pieces together are able to kind of like really demonstrate what the whole tapestry of what's going on in Vermont is.
Great, thank you. Are there any pieces of data from the housing needs assessment that are more compelling or maybe concerning and to you, and what story does that data tell?
Yeah, yeah. So let me pull up a few slides again. Let's see if I can do this smoother this time. Cool. All right. So one of the first kind of baseline data points that I think is really helpful to understand is just like, when we're talking about household housing in Vermont, what are we actually talking about? So there are about 339,000 homes in Vermont. And these are really anything that's viable for full year dwelling. Um, so can be a single family, multifamily, here are some of the just examples just down the street from my house. Um, but something that I wouldn't really know if I hadn't started this work as a research coordinator at VHFA and done this work with housing needs assessment was really this 51,000 seasonal homes that exist in the state. So when we're thinking about what's called tenure or really what's kind of more commonly understood as like occupation status of households. The two main that are broken down are owner-occupied households and renter-occupied households. And however, there's this other chunk that the Census Bureau considers vacant for various reasons. But ultimately, what their kind of central definition is that if it is not for full year occupation in kind of traditional standards, it can be considered vacant. However, in Vermont, one of the really significant home types that's considered vacant are seasonal homes. So they're broken out here, but if you look at, the Census Bureau, and this is why something like housing data is such a valuable resource because we break it out into like a more understandable Vermont context. If you look at Census Bureau numbers, you'll see, whoa, there's 61,000 vacant homes in Vermont. What does that mean? Well, in reality, 51,000 of those are seasonal homes. And it's just a condition that is pretty unique to Vermont. Vermont has been in the top 2 or 3 states in the country, with primarily Maine, but also New Hampshire, in terms of the number of homes that are dedicated to seasonal usage throughout its history. It's been in between 10 and 15% of the housing stock in the state since about 1940. And that's just a really significant feature. There's these 51,000 homes that are not being occupied full time. that maybe they are. Maybe they are viable for full year occupation. Some of them likely are not, places in that may not have full plumbing or could not sustain full year plumbing. Um, Places that are in deep in a ski mountain where it's like this really doesn't make sense as um full year occupation, these kinds of things. So that was one compelling point that has really come clear from my work with this. And I think I will go to not that one, but this one. And another really distinct feature of Vermont's housing stock is that 25% of all homes that are in the state were built prior to 1939. And Vermont, again, along with Maine, has among the oldest housing stock in the country. Um, and while it's not to say that older homes are always going to be of a worse housing quality, the likelihood that they could potentially become unsafe or hazardous is just more likely than with newer homes. So again, when we're talking kind of about like the at-risk households in Vermont, the fact that more than 80,000 homes are built almost more than that includes all homes, that can go back even to 1700, but at the youngest, those homes are approaching 100 years old. So um, really what that is just that there's, additional considerations about uh, making sure that those are able to stay viable, making sure that those are able to stay safe, and especially that people that may not have uh, the robust required resources to do a full fit up of their home, still are able to live in safe and healthy housing. Um, yeah, I think that that is kind of a key point with the housing stock. Um, and then something else that we, found was that, as I was saying before, there was certain conditions that were likely going on in the state prior to the pandemic, and then in the immediate years afterwards, there were some different conditions that we're still, feeling the impacts of now, likely will for a while, and also because of kind of the lagging nature of data, we're not able to get things that are brand new. We don't know what 2025 conditions are. We can only look back, and even so, we can only look back 2 years at the earliest at this point. Um, we're not sure exactly what the full impact of some of these trends are going to be, but from some of our analysis, it seems like um, something different happened, and really what that manifested in was net migration into the state. So um, a really key feature of Vermont's population is that Vermont is an aging population, and since 2016, there hasn't been any what is considered natural population change in the state, which natural population change is births and deaths. So the ways population can change in an area is through either those factors or from migration, people moving into and out of the state. Um, as you can see in this graph, it was relatively, slightly positive, slightly negative a few years, and then post-pandemic, this immediate, pretty significant jump. And there's some considerations with, as you might be able to see, there this 2020 data isn't available, but at the same time, we also saw some pretty significant. It's not the next slide. It's well, that's okay. We saw some pretty significant factors influencing the price of housing and the rate through which homes were selling. So again, that kind of tracks with like the experience that was happening on the ground. There was this really heating up market, this increase in migration into the state. At that time where remote working became much more viable, people were trying to leave different areas. I was kind of borne out in the data in some ways. Now what we're seeing, what we're trying to figure out is like, okay, that happened. Is it still happening? And what is going to happen, next year and over the next few years. So what we oh here we go here here's that component that I was talking about with the rise in increase in home prices. So this is really kind of a compelling graphic. It's an unfortunate it's unfortunate that it's compelling because I find myself as a renter too that would have a lot more difficulty purchasing a median price home now than any real buyer would in 2021. And you can kind of see it that through some of the process that we did to try to figure out like, okay, what is the effective buying power of the renter market right now? And if you consider, both the price that homes are going for, what wages were, what wages would need to be to purchase a home, also considering interest rates and the other additional factors that go into it, the effective buying power of renters really likely went down from the beginning of the pandemic even to now. And yeah, well, again, we can't say exactly will that trend continue. It seems like it may, but one thing that really has also happened is that since interest rates have gotten to that really challenging point, where they have stayed, the number of homes for sale has really gone down. So people are just not moving really, and understandably so, because when the price of housing is increasing and people are feeling like they would get less for more. It's something that I hear a lot. People are saying, yeah, I would love to downsize, but I get a small condo for, less than, or for more monthly than I can already get for my house that's paid off. That's really where the situation of the imbalance in between home sizes and household sizes. So while I'll go back a few slides, while Vermont's population is aging, as I mentioned before. This portion that is highlighted orange of 55 plus, that's really kind of considered like the baby boom generation. And most when we look at the breakdown of owner and renter households, as it kind of makes sense, owner households are largely going to be older households, renter households are largely younger households. So these older households are in homes that at a time maybe were fitting for what their conditions were. Not to be too overly stereotypical in nuclear family, but 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that was a pretty common experience. People having multiple parents, multiple family, multiple children in these homes that have 3, 4 bedrooms that were fitting for what they could afford and what their family needed at the time. Fast forward to now where those kids have left the family, or no, they haven't left the family. Hopefully, they've left the family household, and maybe it's one adult still living in a home that has 3 or 4 bedrooms that they have paid off, and again was fitting for what their wages were at the time. Not really finding a way to stay in their community in a home that will fit their needs too. So the option is then instead, okay, well, I'll stay here. And again, as we pointed back to, many of Vermont's aging homes themselves will become harder for people to maintain as they themselves age too. So really where this kind of all points to is that, let's see, that there is just a literal housing shortage. And this is something that when I was, earlier in my housing advocacy career, it's not something that I necessarily would have thought is like, yeah, this is really true. There is just a shortage of the actual number of homes available. But from really digging into the data, this is kind of what it seems like that if you look at some of what the conditions are now, as we were talking about homelessness, we all have people that are renters have gone through the experience of this really tight rental vacancy rate, where in some areas of the state, like in Chittenden County, it potentially is as low as 1%, even though we know that something, closer to 5% is healthy. The statewide, it hasn't gotten much more than 3%. So in conditions where it's just such a tight rental vacancy market, again, people are staying in homes that maybe are not fitting their needs, but staying in these conditions because that's what they feel that they must do. Um, so there's a shortage in that way that the demand for renter households, apartments, currently isn't being met. Um, that third bar, that lowest bar, is also talking about the loss of potential homes that from age, but also we've seen in recent years that there are rising instances of large home losses through flooding and natural disaster, unfortunately. So even through our analysis, we actually went on kind of like a lower end of the rate of home loss that can be expected in the state. So those 10,000 homes, that can be seen as a shortage today. But if we also consider that, like, well, the demand to live in the state exists. People are trying to create households, people are trying to um, rent for some time, then they want the opportunity to purchase a home, or even to just go into a different renter household, and go from a three-person household to three one-person households, or a two and a one, whatever that might be. There is this different kinds of demand that exists to live in the state, and we project that is going to continue to grow, and put further tax on the housing stock that exists currently. So that's kind of how we come to this, and that's really this right here is kind of the key takeaway from all of the points that the housing needs assessment makes. It kind of points to, all right, here's approximately what we're looking at. If we need to start to quantify things, this is this 25 to 36,000 or 24 to 36,000 in just the next 5 years. And there's more to that, but I'll pause because that was a that was a long one.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. I have some follow-up questions, but I really want to leave
Yeah,
time for the audience to ask
yeah,
questions. So I'm just going to summarize for clarification. It sounds like there's been an influx in migration into the state as of 2021. There's a shortage of housing available. People are not moving, and there's also a pretty hefty number of vacation homes or temporary homes that some may be viable, some may not be, but have the potential to be viable and sustainable places for people to have housing.
yeah, yeah, that's it.
Great. Well, the last question that I have for you, I really appreciate this deep dive into the housing needs assessment. I'm just curious about if there's any changes that you're seeing being implemented in order to address some of these issues, and then I'll let the audience take over.
Yeah. Um, so while we were um that's a perfect segue. While we were completing the 2025 to 2029 housing needs assessment, so so remember that was a federal requirement of the state. Um, and thus that was kind of what the contract was written to reflect, those federal needs. At the same time, the state legislature had create I wish I could remember the act right off the top of my head, but had created some additional housing data requirements to create targets for future housing development in the state up through 2030 and 2050. So since we were already working with the State Department of Housing and Community Development on that, um, and they were called out by this state legislation, they said, hey, you're working through 2029. Could you potentially continue that work out through these longer time periods to 2030 and 2050, and help us kind of get grounded in creating some statewide and regional housing targets throughout the state? So we said yes. And then which goes into why I was like, when did we actually publish this? Because we finished the main one and then immediately got onto this longer term housing targets appendix. that was published earlier this year in February. And so that piece is being used as kind of the basis for the state's requirement to create housing targets. And we used slightly different methodology to go from this, it was really short run that I was showing and talking about some of the immediate conditions that we've had in 5 years. We had to kind of think about it in a different perspective to say like, okay, there's just going to be different factors that are impacting the state 20 years from now as opposed to 5 years from now. So in this instance, what I was talking about with demographics is really going to start to become of critical importance, where that baby boom demographic group is going to age. Anyways, that is to say that we submitted that to DHCD, and they're currently working with the regional planning commissions to create regional targets for 2050, and then beyond regional targets, also town level targets. And I'm thankful that we're not doing that town level part. The regional planning commissions are taking it to the town level because they just have so much more local experience than we do, and they're able to make more appropriate metrics. But yeah, this is something that it's happening and is being reported out, and soon, really, there should be targets throughout the state that towns can be kind of pushing towards in order to say, hey, we all have to, every part of the state has to do not everything, but just many hands make light work. Or yeah, I think that's the expression. If every area of the state is able to help provide just a little bit of densification, just a little bit of housing development in the next 10, 20 years, it is actually viable to address some of the problems that we were describing earlier. Act 181. Thank you, Jess.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Nate. I appreciate you taking time to answer all of my questions. I want to turn it over to some of the folks in the audience. We do have 5 minutes left. However, if people have time to stay on for a couple more minutes to hear questions,
Yeah. And I'm available
to
too.
Awesome.
Down a few extra minutes.
And at the end, I will ask if you have any contact information or other resources that you want to share with folks. So please feel free to stay on to get that information from Nate, or you can watch the recording and hear how you can potentially connect with him or VHFA in the future. All right. So people could raise their hands or use the hand raising react button to ask questions. That would be awesome. Right.
And Buster has a question.
Hi, Buster.
Good afternoon, everyone. Housing needs assessment needs a lot of work if we're going to eat. Page 129 on the special chapters, migrant workers, and then it has some tags. I disagree with that, and it's a sad part because we're missing a lot of our agricultural workforce, and that should have been included. And in the chat, I noticed an outdated Vermont housing needs assessment from the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. That assessment is only focused on the farm housing. And it was 5 years ago. And if we're going to grow food and we're going to we need to do a better job at bringing our agricultural workforce into the data, because our farmers and our farm workers need a home. And all across the country, I was a former board member of a non-for-profit organization that's in 9 states and Puerto Rico. And that organization has built homes off the farms where farm workers have a place to live and grow food for everybody on this planet. And yet, our housing experts, if they are, have not acknowledged
Buster,
off the farm housing.
can I
I'm
please
done. Have a great day.
thank you. Yeah, and I don't really appreciate kind of being denigrated as like not putting in effort to try to capture, a really vulnerable population. And I want to say that we also cited that VHCB report that was specifically for Vermont's housing farm workers. And you're right. You're right that there are many challenges, especially for vulnerable populations. And collecting data about these populations is really hard. And I think that we, did our due diligence to do what we could in order to collect that information. We are not someone that can go and um, uh, survey farm workers. I'm a researcher. I'm a writer. I do data analysis. I would love to be able to point to a great survey of farm worker housing. And I can say that the 2021 VHCB report is that. And you're right, it should be updated. And there's not funding right now to do that, at least within my work. So I apologize. I'm a little bit flustered by really the tone that you took there, Buster, because I think we're trying.
Not hard enough. And I'm sorry you take it that way. But we need food and we got to do better. And that is only focused on the farm housing. You guys never looked at off the farm housing throughout the country. Have a great day.
I'm sorry, Buster.
I'm going to chime in. Thank you, Buster, for your question, and I appreciate your response, Nate. And thank you for the work that you do. And of course, there's always room for improvement. So I appreciate Buster, you explaining what you feel needs could be, and that's hopefully something that we can move towards in the future as a community. But I do want to move forward if anyone else has any questions. I do see Rachel is on. I don't want to put you on the spot, Rachel, but you had emailed me a question. So if you want to ask that question, feel free, or I can do that for you if that would be helpful. And then we'll have to wrap.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'll ask. I was wondering, Nate, what kind of awareness, if any, do you have about Vermont towns or cities who are either in a good position now or are working toward putting themselves in a better position to build more housing more quickly, like from a permitting, zoning, and appeals perspective?
Yeah, so this is a great kind of opportunity to dive into what is available on housingdata.org. And I'll quickly, share my screen over here because this is really kind of where a lot of that information can be found out. And I'll show you how you can get there. So if you've ever been on housingdata.org before, this will look slightly different. We've recently gone through a great website upgrade, so more good changes are going to be coming down the pipeline. But here are two kind of areas that you can point towards that are going to be immediately helpful. So, I'll go back actually. Site's broken down into three areas. Housing Resource Toolbox, that's kind of, pointing towards some of the more text-based examples of what towns are doing. The data profiles is that data that I was showing as the bedrock of the housing needs assessment. And then the directory of affordable rental housing. So that's the actual listing of all of the affordable rental housing that's been built throughout the state. So we're going to go to the data profiles and first show the community snapshot. So here, this is a place that we've kind of created this as just a quick and dirty. Here's if you just want to know kind of generally what's going on in a town or be able to compare towns, counties in the state, that's something that we can do here. So say we have the Vermont numbers here, kind of looking at these vacant seasonal occupied percentages, these numbers that I was pointing towards before. Say we wanted to include, let's say Barnett, why not? And Orange County. We can see here the differences in some of these factors that are present throughout the towns and counties in the state. So, for example, Orange County has a significantly, or about a 10% higher owner-occupied percentage than the state at large. And Barnett has a pretty significantly higher seasonal home percentage than the state. So that's one way that you can kind of just from a data perspective, start to get a little bit grounded on these things. But then we'll go back to the Housing Resource Toolbox. And then within here, you can see a lot more about some of the things that are happening at local levels. So in this topics area, one page I'll point to is local housing committees. So these are a list of local community groups that, have gone through some sort of organizing activities and have let us know. And, so that's one aspect, but then also we'll go one other area into our regulatory tools area. Here's a list of some, actual more technical tools that a municipality or a local community can undertake to try to do some of these things. And within that, there's also some examples of towns that are doing these, some of their, underlying documents of the Burlington Inclusionary Zoning Ordinance, as well as national examples of things doing this too. So that's kind of like your jumping off point towards understanding what's actually happening in towns and what's going on specifically. And what's great is that with that new site, we can kind of continue to build, and that's going to continue to grow as hopefully a resource for all kinds of housing advocates, regardless of kind of if someone's their first day trying to figure out what is affordable housing to someone that's been doing it for years.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll poke around out there.
Yeah. And reach out if you have any questions.
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome. Well, that is the last question that we're going to take for today. I don't see any other hands up. This webinar is coming to a close, and I just want to thank Nate so much for coming and sharing such great information about the research that he's doing with the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. Please join next week's webinar on April 18th, same time, 12:30 to 1:30, and that will be fair housing in homeownership. And we'll have two great guests from different housing trusts throughout the state. If you missed any of the resources that were shared in the chat, they will be included in a follow-up email. And I will pass it over to Nate one more time to share any lasting information or resources or contact information.
Yeah, I'd say check out housingdata.org. It's a great resource. And you can find my contact there too.
Awesome. Thank you, Nate. And thank you everyone for your participation and thoughtful questions. I appreciate it. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
See y'all. Bye.